Raider Nation, good morning. It's Mitchell Renz here, host of the Raiders Report, with some interesting Raiders news that dropped yesterday, and maybe you weren't live with us breaking it all down for March Madness and you missed it, so I wanted to be able to talk about it with you today, and I'll tell you why I think that this is interesting, that the Raiders ended up meeting with NFL free agent defensive tackle Leki Fotu yesterday, who was also scheduled to meet with the Buffalo Bills today. He is only 26 years old. He's played on 2 different teams in his NFL career, only 2 games last season. The reason why, though, I look at this and I go, that's interesting to me. Because I could confidently look at every single person that tunes into today's show and I go, the most confident unit that I have right now for this Raiders team is the defensive line. Because you got Christian Wilkins, Adam Butler, Max Crosby, Tyree Wilson, Malcolm Kuntz. So I sit up here and I go, all right, well, if they're looking at somebody like Fotu at defensive tackle, does that mean that they're also potentially looking at, other defensive tackles if Fotu ends up going to the Buffalo Bills? So I know this, and I love that Pete Carroll and I love that John Spytek think the exact same way. This is a team that clearly values the trenches because Fotu's not a big name. He is a depth guy. But if they're still looking at defensive tackles, that tells you they value the trenches. So coming up here on today's show, I'm going to tell you why I believe the silver and black are interested in Leki Fotu. And then at the end of the show, I'll say, here are some other NFL free agents at the defensive tackle position if Fotu doesn't end up joining the silver and black. Now, here's the thing. If the Raiders do end up getting a deal done, I will drop another video here on Fotu, just like earlier in the week when the Raiders had a visit with Christian Elliss. We ended up getting you a brand new video on the Raiders going out and signing Elliss, which, by the way, the Patriots still have until Monday, 72 hours to be able to kind of It was a restructured tender, so they have still until Monday to be able to answer that one. But anytime the Raiders do something, I'm going to be here getting you guys some videos, and I wanted to drop a video before all the March Madness craziness started again. So first reason here of why I think that the Raiders could be interested in Fotu, it's a cheap John Jenkins replacement. I'll be honest, if I got to pick between Fotu or John Jenkins, I'd rather just bring back Jenkins, but maybe they're looking at the age aspect of it where Jenkins is 35 years old. Fotu is somebody who's, again, only 26, will be 27 to start the year, but this is a big body guy on the interior, and I think that that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a big old boy in the middle of a defense at 6'5", 335 pounds, because that's kind of the player that Jenkins was. And when you bring in somebody like Fotu, you want him to kind of play that John Jenkins role. Jenkins is a much better player still at this age, but when you have a lot of money invested in Christian Wilkins, when you just re-sign Adam Butler to a deal, when you have Tyree Wilson, Malcolm, a lot of those other guys that I mentioned, sometimes you might want to try to bring in a vet, and I get it. A vet at 26, 27 years old, but he has at least played 4 or 5 years of NFL experience, but you're just looking for a dude to eat up a lot of space, and Fotu can eat up a lot of space. I will admit, when you look at his numbers the past 4 seasons, there's not a lot to be inspired about. In 2023, played in 11 games, started 9 of them. In 2022, played in 17 games, started in 9 of those. In 2021, played in all 17 games, started in 3. This would be, again, another little bit of a depth piece. And when you look at the defensive tackles that the Raiders have right now, I trust Christian Wilkins. I trust Adam Butler. And those are going to be your 2 starters. But you have somebody who's young that the Raiders like in Jonnu Lalu. Matthew Butler is a very unproven player, and then Manoa is another very unproven player. So I could understand the Raiders going, you know what? Because we lost out on a K'Lavon Chaisson, what if we try to make somebody like Tyree Wilson the K'Lavon Chaisson replacement, and instead of using Tyree on the interior, which I actually would still like for them to be able to do, they are going to try to bring in somebody that, who knows, maybe he's got a coaching connection, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But Fotu is really just a depth piece, and I think it's a cheap way that they're looking to bring in somebody to be a John Jenkins replacement. But here's the big question on today's show. It's going to be the pinned comment, and if you don't know what a pinned comment is on YouTube, it is the number one question that I want you to answer from watching the show. It's literally going to be pinned to the YouTube video underneath, so give me a yes, give me a no. Should the Raiders go out and sign Leki Fotu? The cool part about this, y'all about to get hit with a YouTube ad break? I'm not going to be honest. If you want to let it play, it helps out Chugs, and I'm not going to get mad about it. My answer coming up here in just a moment, because Leki Fotu is somebody that I do want to discuss here a little bit on the Raiders Report. My answer to whether or not I would want the Raiders to go out and get Fotu is Sure, right? I will admit, there are other defensive tackle prospects that I think are better in free agency that I think actually would make a little bit more sense for this. But one of the things that I have said live multiple times is I don't know if the Raiders are going to add a defensive tackle in the draft. But at the end of the day, I trust Rob Leonard. I think he's one of the best defensive line coaches in the NFL. And even though Leki has struggled throughout the majority of his career, if Rob Leonard looks at me and if Patrick Graham looks at me and they go, I can turn that kid into something, hey, let's freaking run it. And that's the next reason here of why I think that the Raiders could potentially be interested in Fotu. You got to trust Rob Leonard. And I know that a lot of times when people see somebody that has struggled the entirety of their career. And here's the thing, man. When you look at the PFF grades here for Fotu, you're going to be like, I don't know if the Fotu is the first F word that comes to mind when you look at this, right? It's another one that's got 4 letters in it. You can figure it out. But it's bad. I mean, and the grades are bad. This is somebody that's been really inconsistent, especially in the run game. He's been somebody that can get after the quarterback, but when you're a space eater like that, I need you to be able to take on double teams. I need you to be able to help out in the running game. But if Rob Leonard looks at a young player, if PG looks at a young guy and they go, I can do something with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to trust them. But anytime that the Raiders either bring somebody in on a visit or are looking at somebody, if there's one thing that I've learned, and somebody the other day called me Mitch Relationship Renz, and I laughed out loud because I always go, what's the relationship? What's the coaching connection? What exactly is the reason that the Raiders are potentially bringing in Fotu? So when you look at the coaching connection here, you got to go, what exactly is it? And the connection that Fotu has, and it might not even be the reason why they're bringing him in, but to me, it's something that it does always intrigue my mind. The connection is Marcus Robinson. Hear me out. I know that he is the defensive backs coach. I know that he's the cornerback coach for the Raiders, but Robinson is somebody that this organization does really truly value his opinion. So the fact that he was on the same team, Robinson with Fotu, with the Arizona Cardinals from 2020 to 2022, maybe Robinson saw something in him and goes, you know what? I can make this work. Who knows? Maybe Chip Kelly from going up against him because Fotu played at Utah from 2016 to 2019, and Chip Kelly was the head coach of UCLA from 2018 to 2023. Maybe he saw him in a few games like, you know what? That kid was pretty damn good at Utah. Was a round 4 pick. I want to say like 114 overall a few years ago to Arizona. But I do know because Marcus Robinson's, what he has to say does carry a lot of weight in this organization. That could be another reason. Let's go to the final reason here of why I think the Raiders could be interested in Fotu. Other draft needs. I said it the other day on the show that I actually don't really think that the Raiders are going to be a team that looks to draft a defensive tackle because they've already done some stuff this offseason that, makes me wonder, all right, are they just going to try to keep what they have right now? And maybe, again, you could add a John Jenkins replacement, which has been something that I have mentioned multiple times. But when you think about some of these other Raiders draft needs, the Raiders only met with one defensive tackle at the combine, and that was Mason Graham. That was the only one. Now, they met with other edge prospects, other defensive line prospects, but in terms of a formal meeting at defensive tackle, they met with one guy and one guy only. The top defensive tackle in this year's class, Mason Graham, right? And if you go out and you get Graham, that's going to totally change your defensive line. But being interested in Leki Fotu does not tell me that this team's interested. Not that they're not interested in Mason Graham, but, you could then say if Leki Fotu is somebody that you're looking for, maybe you're looking to draft a defensive tackle on day 3. But when I see this defensive line, and I know the Raiders are really weak in some other areas, it wouldn't shock me if the Raiders go, you know what, let's add a Leki Fotu type of cheap free agent, an older player, and then we can use those other 9 picks that we have on other spots because our defensive line that is fully set. It's also not the strongest defensive tackle class for the NFL draft this year. Before we get into some other NFL free agents that the Raiders could potentially be interested in, I did want to tell y'all that if anybody's looking for a Raiders jersey, you can always go to chatsports.com/Raiders jerseys. That link is going to be available to y'all down in the comments, down in the description of today's show. Whether you're looking for a Max Crosby, a Brock Bowers, if you want a Geno Smith jersey, you better pre-order him now. It's not going to be 00. He's going to be number 7. Trevon Merrick's not on the team anymore, but you have to just pre-order it because he technically hasn't picked the number because he technically hasn't had his press conference yet, which is all going to end up going down once that contract extension ends up getting signed. But if you're like me and you're like a lot of other Raiders fans, or you're like, Bro, I'm not buying jerseys because these guys, they're Devontae Adams, Derek Carr, Darren Waller, they keep getting traded left and right, or, they don't end up bringing them back. I hear you loud and clear. You want an OG jersey, a Bo Jackson, Howie Long, some of these greats, Charles Woodson, chatsports.com/Raiders jerseys. All right, so coming up here next, let's talk about, here's some other players that are NFL free agents that in my mind, again, and this is just the way that my mind works, is if the Raiders are interested in Fotu, that tells me that they're looking for a cheap defensive tackle that they can use as depth. So here are some other names that I'm at least just going to throw out there that I would say, if you're interested in Fotu, let's look at these other NFL free agents. The first one coming up here is Calais Campbell, who I know he's 38 years old, but Calais Campbell's kind of like a Bobby Wagner to me, where until he starts playing bad, I'm just going to think that he's going to continue to play well. And defensive tackle has been one of those positions where you can have these guys play it until their mid-30s. Campbell's still playing at a high level. When you look at his PFF grade, still one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL. Has that Miami connection, which is important to Patrick Graham, Rob Leonard, Christian Wilkins, Adam Butler. All those guys are from Miami, which is also one of the reasons why the Raiders last season had John Jenkins, who is still a free agent. And I'm telling you this right now, I would bring back Jenkins. Like, you tell me I get him on a one-year deal, $3 million, sign me up for that ASAP Rocky, because Jenkins has that connection, and he was a lot better than I think what people want to realize last season, and he's still a big old body in the middle, and he's just one of those really, really reliable defensive tackles. And I've said this term a bunch this offseason of bridge quarterback, bridge this. I mean, I think John Jenkins is a great bridge defensive tackle, an old man in a sense, to help teach some of those young guys, like a John Ulalu, right? Maybe even like a Matthew Butler. Another name that you can consider is Benito Jones, which is a lower tier level of the first two guys that I mentioned, but another really big old body in the middle who was with the Miami Dolphins from 2020 to 2021. So he was playing with not Patrick Graham. Graham was there the year before, but Rob Leonard in 2020 also has a connection with Christian Wilkins. If you were to ask me if they don't end up getting Leki Fotu, I do think Benito Jones could just be another name that I'll at least throw out there to keep in the back of y'all's mind. So before we get into more NFL free agents, who did you take to win it all in March Madness? And yesterday was, to be honest, one of the more boring first-round days, I thought. Now, the games that were a little bit later on, like the Arkansas-Kansas game, was amazing. We went to this random bar here in Dallas, but it's a Kansas bar, watching some Kansas fans lose. I mean, they're also probably Chiefs fans, so it felt good deep down to see that. But let me know down below, who did you take to win it all in March Madness? I'll tell you the two teams that I took here in just a moment. So I always do two brackets. I do a chat sports bracket, and I end up doing a bracket with my family. In the family bracket, I ended up rolling with Florida because that's the team that I think is the best team. But the one that I did at Chat Sports, I ended up taking Houston because that's Chugs' team, and I know deep down if Houston's winning, Chugs is going to be hyped, and we might be able to do some more crazy stuff here on the Raiders Report. Let's keep it moving, though, with some NFL free agents. My guy, Jonathan Hankins, even though he lost to me in a competitive wing-eating contest, I haven't talked to Hank in a few years, but still another really big body guy who played on Seattle's team. He's got a little bit of a Pete Carroll connection there. He was traded away from the Raiders to the Dallas Cowboys, and Hank is getting up there in age, no doubt about it. He's looking to, venture into some other things. I know him and his wife recently just opened up their own business down here in Dallas, but still, he's been in the league for so long, and if you're looking for another just vet in the middle that has some connections with current Raiders players and that Pete Carroll coaching staff, there's some names there to throw out there. Next name, I'm not going to butcher his last. Foley, I think it's Fatu Kasi. He's another big body guy on the interior. Cheap names, right? Like, if we're looking at Leki Fotu, for goodness sake, could we also look at somebody cheap that you'd be able to bring in? Would you want to bring in somebody from the AFC West? Maybe a Mike Pennell Jr., somebody that's been a part of the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, if I'm trying to get 1% better, if I'm trying to find a little bit of a competitive advantage, if you're telling me I can build my trenches and maybe get 1% of a little bit of knowledge on Patrick Mahomes, a little bit of 1% knowledge on somebody like Andy Reid after seeing the way that team struggled against the Philadelphia Eagles, a 38% pressure interior rate, like, that's something that's going to interest me. Quentin Jefferson is another name that I'll throw out there where doesn't really fit the bill of the big body defensive tackle that I've kind of talked about on this show, but Quentin Jefferson was somebody that I want to say in 2022 was with the Seattle Seahawks, so has a Geno Smith, has a Pete Carroll connection, but also in 2021 was with the Raiders. And if there's one player that I think has I don't want to use like the grandfather term, but Max Crosby loves Quentin Jefferson and has always valued his leadership and the way that he thinks about the game. That does really matter, obviously, to this organization. So because of that, I'm going to throw Quentin Jefferson on the list. Appreciate all y'all tuning in to today's show. And again, if anything happens around the Raiders today, I'll provide another video. You already know that. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure those notifications are turned on. And I'll do my best to keep you guys up to date on this entire Leki Fotu situation.